when I think about bearing witness and how can we engage in the larger conversation that's happening in our world to be in a space of bettering our world. I feel like I'm supposed to do this work through literature.
What's good? I'm Nikisha Elise Williams, and this is Black and Published, bringing you the journeys of writers, poets, playwrights, and storytellers of all kinds. Today's guest is Kim Johnson, author of the YA novel Invisible Sun. While the novel is set during the height of the COVID pandemic in 2020, Kim said her goal was to make sure she balanced the trauma of that year with its triumphs as well.
When you write about difficult topics that I tend to write about, it's really easy for non-Black readers to only think about the dark situation, sort of like it's their porn that they're sort of like looking at that attracts them, is the trauma, is the pain, is they want a story on teaching and all these kinds of things. And so it's so important to me when I write my story that I have the whole sort of like breadth of the Black experience.
Kim readily admits that she came to writing late in life. She explains the feeling of being woken up out of her sleep to pursue a dream she never knew she had. Plus, how she used the specificity of niceness in the Pacific Northwest to infuse a more sinister plot into her novel. And how she really feels about being an author whose book is banned. That and more is next, when Black and Published continues. All right. So, Kim, when did you know that you were a writer?
Yeah, I came to writing late in life. I'm 44 now, and I started writing at 32. And it wasn't until I wrote the first draft of my first novel that I've ever written that will never see the light of day that I that I finally claimed the identity of a writer. But it was something that I completely avoided, even being someone I have a college degree, master's degree, but it was something that I felt like an imposter about, that it wasn't my skill, it wasn't my thing.
Why did you feel that way, that it wasn't something that you could do?
I had a misconception of what being a writer was. In my head, it was always the people who, got A's on their papers and they wrote it that first draft and it was perfect. And I never actually understood the process of revisions and what revisions do. And it was something that anytime I had a paper, I would have so much stress and I'd worry so much about grammar. And I felt like I needed to know how to explain like what's the adjective and all these things about the mechanics of grammar. And because I wasn't able to quickly articulate it, I just really had this sense that I just wasn't a strong writer. And so it was a skill I never really worked to develop. And it wasn't until I actually became a writer and had the identity of a writer that I've constantly been working on my writing and developing it as a strength.
So, what inspired you to want to write, even though you didn't have the necessary confidence, it would seem, to say, you know what, I'm gonna write a book?
Yeah. Yeah. I have always been a storyteller.
Mm.
I never thought of it as writing. I've always been someone who would like orally tell a story or communicate in that way. In my head, I was always telling stories. I was always daydreaming. I was a huge reader growing up where I read stacks and stacks of books, breaking down the story. When I watch a movie or a show, I'm breaking down the plots. I'm rewriting what I felt like should have happened. And I woke up one day and I had a very, very vivid dream. And I saw it as a movie, actually. That's how I really saw it. And then I got up and just told my husband that I wanted to go to the coffee shop and like start writing. And he was like, "You just trying to trying to get away from the baby," because I had. I mean, we had like our 1.5, 2 year old, little guy, and I'm like, "Yeah, I need a break," but
But also,
and I started writing it down. And once I started writing it down, I love the process of creating. And
Mm,
I had to push through all of that sort of imposter syndrome because I wanted to create and I wanted to see it on the page.
okay. So then you said that novel will never see the light of day. But what was next was that This Is My America?
No. So I spent 2 years working on that first novel and then realizing I wanted to get published. And I sent it off to a bunch of literary agents and was getting lots of different rejections. But I was learning about pacing and writing a query letter. And finally, I was like, well, if I want to be a writer, because by then I had the identity of wanting to be a writer, I'm like, I have to write more than one book. And so I had another idea and I started writing, and it was faster. I immediately started getting query pickups from agents, and I hadn't quite nailed that sort of agent scenario. And I went through a process of revision. But during the time of having my second book really drafted and done and sharing it with folks, there was a lot going on in the world, especially around 2014, 2015. And I felt like I knew what my voice was. Like
Mm.
it took me that third book to realize, who am I as a storyteller? How can I put all the pieces of my identity, my professional work that I do, the activism that I do, and putting it in a story? And I started just writing This Is My America. And about halfway through writing that draft, not even halfway through writing that draft, I had an agent reach out to me about my second book and wanted to go through a revision process with me. And we got on a call and I shared my excitement about, the thoughts that she had. But I also told her, I was like, I'm being called right now to write this other book. And I don't want to touch anything else until I'm actually done with this book. And then she was like, send it to me. And I'm like, it's a mess. It's not even done. And she's like, send it to me. I really liked your second. I'd love to see what your writing is with your third. And 2 weeks later, she offered.
Okay. I love this story because it's so like, I like telling stories. I'm not really a writer. I'm going to try it anyway. And then the relentlessness of you practicing and honing the craft and learning and then incorporating all that you were doing and then it paying off in a big way. Were you always writing YA novels or novels for teens and stuff?
I had stopped reading for a really long time. I was always reading nonfiction. Like nonfiction has always been, especially as an adult after college, continuing to read lots of nonfiction. But I dipped into reading fiction through young adult because young adult at like that 2010, 2011 time period was getting really big and it just seemed much more accessible. And I love that space. And especially because I work my other life hat that I wear is I've been an administrator for a long time in higher ed. And so I'm always mentoring college students and working with college students. And so it just really is a space that I've enjoyed writing because I'm around so many young people who are hopeful and want to make change and do all these things that a lot of my books explore.
So then, would This Is My America becoming your debut and you getting the agent for that book? What was your publishing process like for that? And then, was it the two-book deal to do This Is My America and Invisible Sun, which is now out?
Yeah, so I did get a 2 book deal, but it actually was for my third book that is coming out. So I had sold the novel, and they said with this next standalone that they would want to buy that would be my second book deal. And the publishing process for This Is My America, after I got the agent, I actually spent a year finishing the novel, having my agent read it, giving me feedback, and then sort of going on these rounds of polishing. So that took about a year. And then when we were ready to go out on submission, I was ready. My agent was like, another round. I was like, no, we ready. We ready. We ready. And she was like, okay, let's do a test batch. And so she sent it out to about a handful of editors. And 2 weeks, I had a fast story. So 2 weeks into the submission process, I had one editor that said, I would love it. I'd love to do R&R with you. And then I said, well, let's wait to hear what else we hear from editors. And then another week later, I had an offer. And so my publishing process, I had that long wait of like many, many years of like working to get it done. But once I hit that sort of like ready, set, go button, it moved pretty quickly. And so when I published my book, I was working on The Color of the Lie, which is my second novel, which is a historical thriller. And this was all during the pandemic. And I finished that draft. I sent it to my editor, and she was working on feedback. And as she was working on feedback for me, I I was called again. I feel like a lot of my writing is about like bearing witness and a story really sort of sticking with me. And the idea for Invisible Sun came to me, and it felt so present and felt so urgent that I let my editor know that, like, I also, I know that we're still like finalizing that other, book that I'm sending, but I'd love to have you look at this proposal for this other book because I really feel like this is also like worthy you buying. And so I sent it to her and she loved it and was like, "You're right." Because I told her, I was like, "I think this should be my second book." And she's like, "You're right. This is." And so that delayed my book coming out. And so that's why now my third book is coming out so quickly after my second, because I had that one done and sort of ready to go already.
Okay, so I just want to get the timeline straight. The book
Yeah.
timeline. So it's
Yeah.
it's the book that you had the dream about that you went to the coffee shop to write while you were getting away from the baby. Then it's
Hmm.
The Color of the Lie. That's going to be your
Nope.
no.
So that book I wrote is like in a closet somewhere
The
or
second
something.
one
I
is in the
don't.
closet somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, the first and the second. I don't know
So
where they are.
so it's two books in the closet. This is
Yeah,
My America, The Color of the Lie, which is coming out third, and then Invisible Sun, which came out second, which we're talking about today.
yeah, yeah.
You said 44 now, you started at 32.
Yeah.
So in 12 years, you've cranked out 5 novels and are on your way to publishing 3. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
What do you think it is about being called to write a book and answering? Because I think a lot of people may be called to tell a story, but don't necessarily answer. Why do you answer?
I've always been a person who has leaned in and had discernment about what is right for me and making decisions that I feel are within my purpose and my values and what I want to sort of come out of life. And so a lot of that I think drives in my writing is that a lot of people would say, like, "You've never written before? Like, why are you like so dogged about it? Like you keep getting rejections." Like why are you so dogged about this thing that you still don't seem as confident? And I think it's because I just really felt like it was for me and there was a reason that I was doing it. And it's cathartic for me, especially what I write about. I think for me, when I think about bearing witness and how can we engage in the larger conversation that's happening in our world to be in a space of bettering our world. I think of about being an educator and thinking about young people, and writing to me has been the answer from which is different than my earlier life, where my earlier life was being in organizations and activism and those kinds of things. And I think those spaces are super incredibly important. And I feel like I'm supposed to do this work through literature.
Mm. All right, so since we're here, let's go ahead and get to the reading. You read a little bit from Invisible Sun, and then we can talk about Andre and his friends across the street.
Yeah.
Kim Johnson's novel, Invisible Sun, centers Andre Jackson, a teenage Black boy recently released from juvie for a crime he is adamant he did not commit. Back home, living through a pandemic and eager to clear his name, Andre tries to lean on his friends, family, and neighbors for help, but soon finds he can't trust everyone, even those who come to his aid. Here's Kim.
I think I'll read from the first chapter. All of my titles are song titles from the 90s and early 2000s, which is connected to the theme within the book of an interest that Andre has. So the first chapter is Don't Speak, February 27th, 2020. I live in the widest big city on the blackest block, simultaneously seen and unseen. I used to hate the erasure, but now I don't mind if I stay hidden, especially since McLaren Youth Correctional Facility is in my literal rear view. But the longer we idle in Portland traffic, the more reality sinks in that that's not how any of this works. Marcus tries to bury this truth with conversations on moving forward, on possibilities, but it will be as hard to shake the strike against me as it is for the windshield wipers to win their battle against this torrential downpour. Marcus's and my coexistence in this car proves that fact. There will always be somebody to check me, to explain myself to keep at a distance, which makes who I roll with matter more than ever. And I don't mean my boy Boogie, who knows I'm more likely to be up late reading Octavia Butler or scouring through my collection of Black Panther comics than be hanging out. I mean my other so-called friends, correction, white friends who've been known to mouth off to an officer without fear, who don't think twice about trying to be anything they want. Meanwhile, I'm not trying to be nothing at all.
Music plays a really big role in this novel, from the song titles for every chapter to Andre and his friend being YouTubers and, doing their first listens of old songs from the 90s and the early 2000s and giving their reactions and balancing everyday teenage Black life and angst with this young man being home on house arrest, basically under surveillance, trying to find out why he was framed for a crime he didn't commit, as well as the pandemic and school. You talk about being called to write this novel. Was all of that in your mind in the calling? Because it's a lot.
That's how my brain is a lot. And I just have these big things that I think about. And I think the reason why so many of my stories, and this story in particular, has so many pieces is that within my daily work that I have and the mentorship that I'm connected to is I mentor a lot of young Black leaders and young Black students. And I'm in a space where there's lots of like advising and counseling, but I'm an administrator. So my connections with a lot of students now is in a space of mentorship. And the people that I'm mentoring are experiencing all of these things. They're experiencing life situations, they're experiencing family situations. They're trying to navigate how they're going to make decisions and how to take action in their life. And they are having breakups and they were experiencing the pandemic. And so when I was wanting to write this story, it came from a lot of those places of like, especially when we think about writing Black characters. Oftentimes, when you write about difficult topics that I tend to write about, it's really easy for non-Black readers to only think about the dark situation, sort of like it's their porn that they're sort of like looking at that attracts them, is the trauma, is the pain, is they want a story on teaching and all these kinds of things. And so it's so important to me when I write my stories that I have the whole sort of like breadth of the Black experience, which when you're dealing with hard things, your friend might try to make you laugh. You seek for those moments of joy in some of our darkest moments. And so having those really came to me. And I'll say, the story did come to me in a space, actually a moment of joy. And it was in the summer of 2020. And I was outside in the sun on my phone in my backyard because, we couldn't go anywhere. So that was like my daily thing was I was doing my sunbathing. And I was watching these two twins trends, who were doing YouTube first time reaction videos. And it gave me a joy every day seeing the new video that they would upload. And I was watching them listen to Phil Collins In the Air Tonight. And I was waiting for that like minute and 40-second beat drop for their reaction because they would they had so much joy. And that's like where the story came to me. It's like in my head, I saw a bridge in the rain in Portland, rain coming down, a large protest that was occurring, and that music, like I see it like a movie. Often I see it like a movie, and that song playing. And so I'm like, what would cause that person to get on that bridge? And I think about my students, like why were they so isolated? And then they were protesting in the name of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. And I really started to think about Portland and how so many people don't know about the history of Portland and the fight that Black Portlanders are going through and sort of the awakening that was happening in their city and how Portland became a national space that people were looking at with these protests, but the experiences of Black Portlanders were not being told. And so that's really how my whole story came to me and wanting to tell a story, and why it was so important to me to have the joy in the story and having Andre have a thing that brought him joy and tied it to the rest of the story, because I experienced all of those things.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I do remember that video of the twins and listening to In the Air Tonight. And I think everybody who's familiar with the song was waiting for that beat drop for their mouths to drop like all of because which is why we love
Yeah.
that song. Like it's
Yeah.
the beginning is fine, but when that beat drop, it's like, oh, we're doing something different now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to touch on what you said about, the history of Portland and Black Portland and really touching on the gentrification and how that affects communities and erodes community and culture. Because you started in your reading saying, I live in the whitest big city on the blackest block. And then on page 255, you go even deeper and say, when you're talking about all the families that have left, it says, all replaced by nice white families and Black Lives Matter signs. My throat aches from seeing the city with more Black Lives Matter signs than Black people. And in the novel, not only is Dre seeing the changes in his neighborhood, he's experiencing them with how he's treated, from having to wear the ankle monitor, what he's been accused of, dealing with harassment from the police and even from neighbors, all while trying to clear his name amongst his friends and his family members so that they're not disappointed in him. So I got to ask about the family across the street. First of all, were you always curious about interracial adoption and how those families work to make that such a central part of the story and to explore the dynamics between the children and the adults and the cultural backgrounds that can keep not only parents, but people in general from really understanding and having empathy for people who are different from them?
Yeah, Oregon is a really interesting place. It's really known to be very liberal and a heavy white liberalness associated with it. People call the area Pacific Northwest nice. So there's this sort of like niceness to what can be oftentimes microaggressions. So, me growing up in Oregon and knowing Oregonians, there actually is a higher transracial adoptions that occur with white families adopting Black children. I actually had a lot of friends who were transracially adopted, where they had a white parent and they were not a white child. And the range of those experiences were all over the place. I think, you know, most of them were all really nice people. Like they were caring. I mean, they, were treating their child well and all these things, but there was a space of not knowing how to do certain things. Like, so there's not in some areas, there's not really a strong Black community. So then their connection to Blackness is so separated that it's so difficult to develop your own identity in a space of not being in all white schools, all white parents, and then maybe your parents will celebrate Kwanzaa with you. And majority of Black people I know don't actually celebrate Kwanzaa. So it's like choices of Blackness, of like where you sort of celebrate Blackness. And it wasn't my sense of sort of trying to pick on a family and say that this is a bad thing. Because I will not speak for those that are in those circumstances. And I've read a lot about the experiences of transracial adoptee advocates and who speak on sort of decision points and how families choose, but it represented Oregon to me in a really heavy way. It also was a part of me bearing witness to a transracially adopted family in Portland that occurred. And so I don't want to sort of say too much because it sort of leaks into the story, but I really wanted to speak on race and to speak on race in Oregon being the one of only, and the experience of folks who maybe make the assumption that because they're in this sort of diverse family that they can't have holds of racism in them. So for me, that was really important to be able to show a dynamic. And because the story is set in a pandemic, because it's isolated, I also felt like having this sort of transracial adopted family experience where the children in the family, there's two Black children, two white children who are biologically from the parents, and then one Latina child, can show the dynamic of race and the interaction of race and the discussion of race in a way that when you were telling a normal story where there's not a pandemic and not such isolated experience, you'd be able to sort of mirror some of those conversations. And I love to sort of challenge those conversations of how do you approach them and how do people grow? How do you be in this sort of ongoing process of that? And how do you call out things that are incredibly problematic and sometimes tragic?
When I think of transracial adoption, I think my only reference points really are the tragedy of the Hart family in
Yeah.
California, as
Hmm.
well. And then on the other end is This Is Us with Randall,
Hmm.
right? And that character. So to see it rendered here in a different way, even hearkening to some things that were happening in Oregon for real, was just really interesting to me. But in touching all of these different dynamics and how you address liberal niceness, which is not necessarily progressive or
Hmm.
anti-racist, it's just
Hmm.
niceness,
Hmm.
as well as the carceral system and the precariousness of the lives of young Black men. You're writing this bearing witness at a time when no one really wants you to do that anymore. And you've already had one book banned, with your first novel being banned. And so now this is out. I haven't seen anything about Invisible Sun being banned, but, let's knock on wood about that. What has it been like to know that your calling to bear witness to these pieces and facets of life are being actively silenced?
So many of us authors who've been fighting to be published that are queer, BIPOC, able, disabled, the sort of varying experiences are going through it really hard. And for me, it really is difficult because I experienced book one and book two really differently. Because even though my first book is challenged, very visible, banned in certain states or school districts and libraries and that kind of thing, it did reach because it came out July 2020, right when
Mm.
everyone was buying these books, right? And so it reached wide. So people still were able to read it. And I've been able to talk about my work a lot. And so that felt very purposeful. Like even in the face of fighting, I was able to get, my story out. It is tiring talking about like because people, you have some readers who want all the answers and expect because you've written this book that you are going to resolve all elements of race, the carceral state, all of the things that I didn't create at all. And that can be exhausting. But with book two, what's really interesting is because I do call out the falseness, the emptiness in, having Black Lives Matter signs, but actually no substance to it. Andre in this story, his dad owns a Black-owned bookstore in Portland, and I show examples of the falseness of people purchasing these books that they know goodwill that they're not going to read, and having this sort of expectation that a small business is going to, be able to act like they're, the Zon, that they're going to be these sort of big box places. And I really wrote this book because people wanted to move on from the pandemic. And having been familiar with being trauma informed, and especially racially trauma informed, you can't move past things.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to heal, you actually have to process it. And so many people still have yet to process what they experienced in 2020. And so, how I feel about this book that's different than my first book is that it's much quieter. There's not as, in terms of like people's response to it, it didn't reach as widely as my other works. But I also feel the reason why I wrote this book was that so that it would be evergreen. And
Mm.
10, 20, 30 years from now, I wanted this to be in the history books. Like I wanted it to be something that would not be forgotten. And that when people are ready to process, are ready to kind of think about these different experiences from the angle that I took, that it will be there. But it is hard knowing that because your work is banned. I think some people think like, oh, that's great. You're gonna like people are gonna buy a bunch of your books. Like, no, it hurts readers. It hurts young people. And most, you know, there's probably only a handful of folks that are on these banned lists that benefit any. And
Mm-hmm.
I say benefit from a superficial perspective. I actually don't see it as a true benefit, but like that people will pick up and buy because the engine, the publishing engine, the stores know, oh wait, people know about these 5 books. So let's put it out front. And then people feel like, again, very empty, like I'm going to buy that book, but are you going to read it? And so most authors don't benefit in any kind of way. And
Mm-hmm.
overall, it hurts readers. So yeah, as a writer and a writer who writes in the space that I do with the sort of the mindset that I have, I am really trying to balance how do I care for myself and how do I build out a career that can give me the space and time to be able to do what I'm doing and
Mm-hmm.
why thinking about my work in a lot of different ways and not sort of like putting myself in a corner where I will only write certain kind of things in a certain kind of way because that's sort of what it's expected of me. I don't want that either. And so I am in this as I think about what do I want my fourth published book to be, I am thinking about how can I sort of maybe approach things even a little bit differently than I've
Mm-hmm.
done just for my own care and balancing out the kinds of things that I talk about because it can get pretty heavy.
In talking about, caring for yourself because you write about such deep and heavy topics, one, are you okay? Like,
Thank you.
are you okay? And, and then two, do you ever think you may write for adults?
I'm doing great. It is cathartic for me getting my story out and like working through my feelings and reading articles and the vitriol that we hear about and how powerless often we feel because like the same things keep happening. Writing about it like helps let out a lot of that frustration. And so it is helpful. But then I always have to like find other kinds of joy too. And my kids are that, my family is that for me for sure. Watching reality TV and things that, can kind of like balance out the heaviness.
Mm-hmm.
So I am. And I know that there's a lot of writers who approach things differently. And I think I approach my writing like I do my reading. I don't lean in on escaping. So the people who they love a fantasy because they want to be taken out of the world and they want to imagine a whole new world or sci-fi or, those kinds of things or period pieces, or romantic. And they just, people want to do different things. And I lean into like what's happening in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I write. And so I think that's why I'm able to balance things a little bit because it is the thing that I seek. I'm not trying to go into a different kind of world per se. So, and then I would love to write something for adult. It's definitely something that I talk with my agent about and just need more like time and capacity to explore it. But I have a couple of concepts that I've sort of been kind of playing around, but haven't written my proposals and worked on that piece yet. So,
Okay. So I want to switch to a speed round and a game before I let you go for
oh
what's
no, I'm the worst at this.
It's all right. It comes out in the editing. What is your favorite book?
In terms of YA, I really, really love Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Ayers. I love that book. I didn't know what to expect. And I love that in any kind of storytelling when I don't know what to expect. And then it like drives all these like emotions and I'm like crying like a baby
Hmm.
reading a story.
Who's your favorite author?
Jesmyn Ward.
Mm.
Yeah, Jesmyn Ward. I love, she's such a visceral her words are so just visceral and evocative and I love her. I love her story. I pray for her because she's been through so much and yeah, I want her to win. I want her to
Yeah.
win.
Yeah. Since your book has so much music in it, what is your favorite song?
I love Lauryn Hill and I love her album and I've been to her concert and we could go in a whole controversy over going to Lauryn Hill concert, which we will not do.
We will not talk about the recent post on the Shade Room. We will not talk about it. Lauren yelling at the audience. We will.
She was yelling, yeah. And she sure was late to the concert I went to too, but that's okay. I expected that. But I did have to leave because it was like by then it was 2 a.m. and I was tired. But But I love her whole album, This Education of Lauryn Hill. I think just the whole album. My favorite song is her rendition of singing Killing Me Softly. Like that's just my like favorite. I could play it a million times.
It's the Fugees. Old school Lauryn. Okay. Yep. What do you think is the best book to movie or television series adaptation?
I've never really been a fan of the adaptation, even though Please Buy My Book and make it into adaptation.
But please buy my book and make it into a series.
Buy my book and prove me wrong.
I love that.
Oh God, I've never been a fan. I think I love the books because they bring more to it. What's yours? I'm so curious.
Ooh, do I have one? I want to say it's The Color Purple, but I don't think that's it.
Mm-hmm. That was a good one, though.
Actually, I love Little Fires Everywhere.
Yes.
Damn book and show.
That was
my God.
You're right. You know what? You're right. Because I actually, and maybe because I read it first. They did such a good job. And because I made it a limited series, I think that's why I really liked it, because it really built. But they did a really good job.
Baby.
Yeah, I love Celeste Ng as a writer. I love her work.
Like that took me out.
It did. It was good. That was so well done. Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
that took me out.
Yeah. That's gonna be my answer from now on.
Okay. Name 3 things on your bucket list.
Traveling the world, learning another language, and getting off the grid for like a month. No phone, no internet. Walk into a local market that like is a stand. It's like it's like pulling the bananas from the tree and you're
cash only.
Yeah, doing that. Those would be my 3. Yep.
What brings you joy?
Laughter. I mean, I love to laugh, especially when things are dark, like doing something that just makes me laugh, which might be like my daughter reading me jokes.
And what brings you peace?
Meditation lately. Meditation has been really helpful in like calming the mind. And my answer before the meditation would have been like chocolate.
Why not both?
Why not both? Chocolate.
Why not both?
But yeah, but if I think like philosophically, what gives me peace is that I do believe in humanity, even in its darkest moments. And that's sort of like how the meditation actually helps then ground me to be able to like truly continue to believe in that.
All right. And then my final question for you today. When you're dead and gone and among the ancestors, what is one thing you would like someone to write about the legacy of work and words that you left behind?
Oh, I love this. I do think about legacy all the time because I think about, I actually say this a lot about what do I want my literary legacy to be? And I hope that what they write about something I haven't even imagined that I've been able to accomplish, and how you can transform your life in really magical ways, in ways that you couldn't have imagined. And that would be my story, is that it isn't just me going from 32 to 44, learning how to write, but like then I transformed into something I couldn't have imagined. So, yeah.
Big thank you to Kim Johnson for being here today on Black and Published. Make sure you check out Kim's latest novel, Invisible Sun, out now from Penguin Random House. And if you're not following Kim, check her out on the socials. She's at KC Johnson Writes on Instagram. That's our show for the week. If you like this episode and want more Black and Published, head to our Instagram page. It's at Black and Published, and that's BLK and Published. There, I've posted a bonus clip from my interview with Kim about the original title for her novel and how she settled on Invisible Sun. Make sure you check it out and let me know what you think in the comments. I'll holla at y'all next week when our guest will be Tracy Rose Payton, author of the novel Night Wherever We Go.
I remember I had first started to do like writing residencies and do the whole thing. And I had a couple of kind bosses who really let me like take a month off and go do a writing residency. And of course, I didn't tell my coworkers where I was going because that doesn't make any sense to people. And so I just said, oh, I'm just taking, I'm taking time off, blah, blah, blah. And a coworker of mine, he said that when I came back, everyone thought I was in rehab.
That's next week on Black and Published. I'll talk to you then. Peace.